Hello, people of Earth and the universe. It's me, a guy from the internet. And I thought I would make a little video series about how to get going with Python scripting in Blender. Because I found there were a bunch of little catches, there's a bunch of little things that I wish I'd known, I wish someone had just kind of explicitly stated to me, because I do not come from much of a programming background. Before coding in Blender, I'd done a bit of game development, I'd, learned a little bit of a couple of languages, enough to get by in the projects that I was working in, but I was by no means a coder. Debatably, I'm still not much of one. But I'm at the point now where I've coded about a dozen or so add-ons for Blender. I feel pretty comfortable with the interface. And I'm looking back on where I started, and when I first started working with Blender, I was freaked out by Blender. All of my experience with game dev had been 2D up to the point where I started working here, and all of these concepts were brand new to me. And then to add that, complexity of then scripting with all of these new tools, it was pretty overwhelming when I first started. And then, the third little blockage there is all those little catches that I was talking about where, if you don't know, if you haven't done it before, you might not realize that, this is what you have to do or this is how you have to get it done. So this series is going to be for people who really have no experience whatsoever with scripting, with coding, very little experience maybe with Blender. And by the end, you should be a lot more comfortable with it. So this is episode 0. This is the one for people who don't have any experience at all with coding and, don't even necessarily know what a script or code is. So this is going to break it down to really super duper basic concepts. So we're going into the scripting tab here. And already it's like, whoa, what's going on here? There's tons of stuff happening. So, I'll introduce things kind of one at a time, and we'll talk about things. Again, this is going to be super basic. You don't need to know anything before this. So we're going to come in here. We're going to click New. And one thing that you're going to find at the beginning of... Actually, I'm just going to crank up our font size here. One thing that you're going to find at the beginning of every script in Blender is this line: import BPY. So let's figure out what that even means first. So we're writing in a programming language called Python.
That's not important right now.
We'll talk more about what that is and how it works later. But for right now, all you need to know is import. It's basically, the same thing that you would do here, file, import. We're bringing in data from somewhere else. And what are we importing? We're importing BPY. Okay, what's BPY? Well, if we, expand it out a little bit, the B stands for Blender and the PY stands for Python. So BPY is the Blender Python library. And what is a library? It's kind of like, a regular library, a building you go into. There's tons of different books. In this library, it's a folder you go into with tons of different text files. So someone has gone and they've written this interface for you to work with Blender. So it's a way for you to work with Blender using the Python programming language. And what that means is basically you don't have to figure out how to do everything that Blender knows how to do. So like I can click in here, let's delete that cube and let's add, where are we going? A monkey. So we've got this monkey here and we're looking at it. That's a pretty complex shape. And if we go into edit mode, we can see it's made of tons of different vertices all over the place. And they're each offset relative to its origin point. And, then you've got face orientation. You got tons of different stuff going on there that if you had to do that from scratch, pain, that'd be a pretty complicated thing to make. But luckily, you don't need to know how to make it from scratch because Blender knows how to make it. So all you need to know is how does Blender make it? So if we go back, we can delete this. We can just copy and paste from this info window. So every time we do something in Blender, it will add something there and there. Maybe we should bring this down a tiny bit now. Okay, so we still want it pretty large so it's nice and legible. Okay, so what is happening here? Now we've imported the Blender Python library, and now we're using the Blender Python library to do this command. So we know what it does. You know, we went through the Blender interface, we added the monkey, and then we just copied and pasted that command from here. But, you know, what is this command? How does it work? Like, why does this add a monkey to Blender? Why did we have to add this import BPY? So, breaking it down again, BPY here, now that we've imported it, we can access it. And like I said, this is a library is like a folder full of files. So we can think of this as, you know, Blender Python is the folder, and then we go into that, and there's another folder. And the next folder is called OPS. And OPS has, you know, a bunch of things inside it. So OPS is operators. And you're going to notice the more you get going with Python, the more people love these tiny little abbreviations so that you aren't entirely sure what they're actually referring to.
Oh, damn it!
And yeah, we'll get into Python later. But like I said, the part of this series, part of the motivation is just to make some of this stuff really explicit, just to say this is what it is. So maybe this won't be the most Pythonic way to do things, but I think it'll really help people to understand if they're having trouble getting to grips with you know, what the code means and how to write your own, or how to get from just copying and pasting something to having a script that does something that you actually want it to do. So again, we've imported BPY, and what we're accessing is Blender Python. We're accessing an operator. It is a mesh operator, and we could put primitive in here. I'm just gonna ignore primitive, and I'm just gonna say it's called add monkey. So that is essentially the structure that we're going at. We're going into like essentially a folder called Blender Python. Within that, there's, you know, a folder or a file that contains another, until we finally get to this thing that actually does something. And this is the function that adds the monkey. And then after the function that adds the monkey, you're going to see a whole bunch of other stuff. These are called arguments. So what is an argument? Well, you might be able to tell just immediately by looking at the first one, size equals 2. That's going to determine the size of the monkey. So that's all the different things that you can change when you're adding the monkey. But what you'll think is neat, or maybe you won't find it neat at all, is that we can just delete all of these, and I'm going to put a little, you know, whatever, # hashtag in order to tell Blender that this is just a comment. This isn't actually code. This is just a little note that we've written to ourselves. So that's a nice way that you can get something out of your code so it doesn't throw an error. But again, we're probably getting a little bit beyond where we want to go. So I just took all of that stuff out. You know, the size, the location, enter edit mode, and I'm just going to press play on this. So this is how we execute or run the script that we've written. Press play, and we got a monkey right there. So I didn't actually have to add in all that extra stuff. And if we go down, you can see, oh, you know, it got added in anyway. Because these are what Blender calls the default arguments. So if you don't tell Blender to, you know, add a different size or move it to a different location, it's just going to take all of these default arguments, the size of 2, the location right in the world center, and it's just going to use those. So if you want to change something, so let's get rid of the monkey, and let's try size equals 3. And let's run that script again. So press play. we got a bigger monkey. So let's delete that. Size equals 0.2. We got a tiny little monkey. Okay, so we can see now that Blender's got this built-in function that will add that monkey face, but we can also customize it a little bit ourselves. So if we go back, let's see. I'm just hitting undo over and over again. Oops, let's undo again and go back, make that a comment again. Okay, we can see some of these other options here. So control space will make whatever workspace you have your mouse in full screen. So I just made that full screen briefly, just so I don't have to keep turning the font size up and down. So yeah, you can see we've got size here. We've got enter edit mode. So if you want to go straight into the edit and, you know, like that mode we were in where I was showing you all the different points, all the vertices that make up Suzanne there. Whether to align it to the world, a 3D cursor, there's different options there, but let's get rid of these ones because these are probably going to be the ones that you're going to use the most, the size and the location. Scale too, but I find scale doesn't always work the way I expect it to or think it should. So let's just mess with those. That's a little bit of a shorter line too, a little bit easier to read. Yeah, let's see what we can do. Size, let's make it a half size, and let's move it one to the left, one back, and one up in the air. Oh, -1y makes it move forward. Okay, so let's try that again, and let's, boom, there we got another Suzanne. So let's make it 5. And make this -10, -10, 10. So we can change all of these variables, and each time where is that? Whoa, giant Suzanne. Look at that Suzanne dwarfing all the other Suzannes. Every time we run that script, it will run it with all the changes that we've made. So that will take us to a little bit more of the structure of Python and how the programming language works. So you don't need to know a lot to get started. You can just copy and paste, but you're going to need to know a handful of things before you get going too far. So if you have no experience scripting, you've never heard of Python before, there's a bunch of things that you're going to need to know for definite, but I think we'll probably tackle those in a later video. There's also going to be some stuff that you're going to need to know about Blender's data structure. So like you can see things here, it's easy enough to click on them, delete them, you know, undo, add it back. But there's a couple of little catches to how you want to do that with a script and why, you know, there's usually a couple of different ways you can do it and, you know, why you might want to choose one way over another. Or how you can make something a little easier on yourself, basically. So again, we'll go into how Python works, the basics of, you know, just performing all the simplest stuff that you would need to do to perform actions in Blender. And then we're going to look at some Blender data structure stuff as well. And then you'll kind of get the idea of both how the programming language works and how Blender expects you to work with it. I'm hoping that this series helps, you know, other people, but if you want to know how I got from someone who was, you know, totally intimidated by this to someone who feels relatively comfortable now in this environment, I want to pass on some resources that I use to develop that facility, that comfort. So a lot of the stuff that I will show you will, you know, it'll cover the same ground as this series that I'm about to show. But what I found is sometimes you need to hear that same thing in 2 or 3 different ways before it really clicks. Or sometimes you think you understand something when you hear one person's explanation, and then you hear a second person, you know, describe it in slightly different words, and then you kind of realize, oh, you know what, I was thinking of that in a different way. So these were the resources that I used to get started. Scripting for Artists, Dr. Sybren Stuvel goes through, and we can see the videos here. So some of them you need to be signed up for the Dev Fund, I think, or the Blender Studio. But like I said, for beginners, for people who are not really familiar with any of this stuff, missing out on a few of these is not going to make a huge difference. Going through the rest of them is going to teach you just a huge amount. And just as a random side note, when I was first getting started with this, they were doing some live streams. Blender was doing some live streams, and they invited, I don't know if you call him Dr. Stuvel or just Sybren, but he was on one of the streams to talk about getting started with Python and working with it. And I asked him a couple of questions, typed in to be answered on stream. He answered one of them on stream, and I thought, maybe this other question was just like a little too basic and he didn't want to be bothered with it. And, the stream was over, and I thought that was kind of the end of it. And a couple of weeks later, I happened to go back and I discovered that he must have gone on his own time, after the stream had ended, and he'd written this really detailed response to my question about how to structure the UI layout in an add-on. So a lot of the people here are just really helpful, really kind. I had thought maybe, this is too basic for someone, who's on the dev team or whatever, but it wasn't too basic. It just was probably too much time to go into on stream. But he took the time afterwards to give this really detailed response, and I'm really grateful for that. So he is an excellent resource. And I think one that probably everybody in the community knows because he is involved in the Blender dev team. So this next one is one that I don't see as many people talking about, but I have found this to be a massive, massive help. b3d.interplanetary.org. So it's a guy named Nikita. I can't remember. Nikita Akimov. And you might know, if you're a GitHub user, which you probably aren't if you're watching this video, but you will be by the end. You might know him as Korchy on GitHub. Develops a lot of add-ons and, tons of great content on this site going, stretching back years, different Blender versions. So, maybe you're working on 2.9.3, 3.2 is the latest release, but, you really need to know how to do this in 2.9.3, and Python doesn't work exactly the same way. The function isn't there the same. So you can go here and you can check out how, something worked in an older version. Just tons of little things like I said, there's little cracks, there's little things that people don't tell you or don't explicitly lay out. This has been my source for a lot of those things, like, that's how you add that node, or that's how you change that value, or that's how you connect those two things. Just a really great resource for filling in those gaps in how to do stuff in Blender. Okay, so this is like one of the most popular, biggest, Blender YouTubers, but it's a great introduction and it's pretty funny and it's super short. So take a couple minutes and watch it. Oh, and I didn't even have this one in here. Oh, I should totally, okay, we'll move that one to the end. Next is Royal Skies. This is another super short, sub 2 minute tutorial that'll get you up and running with the basics of coding. And he's got another one. This one's 3 minutes and 42 seconds, but you should end up with an add-on by the end of it. Again, a lot of the same stuff that I'm going to be covering in future videos, but sometimes it helps to hear in a few different ways. So the next one, maybe we should do this one first. Python Crash Course for Blender from Curtis Holt. I didn't actually have this video in here originally, but what I did have was this project by Curtis Holt, same guy. So what is EasyBPY? A lot of the stuff that I've been hinting at, a lot of these little, hang-ups, hiccups, are just due to the way this Python API, or that library, the BPY that I was talking about, is structured. So you noticed when we went into Blender and we wanted to add a monkey, we didn't just type in add monkey. We typed in bpy.ops.mesh.primitive_monkey_add bracket size equals. So there's a little bit of a barrier there for a beginner. It's, it makes sense, and it tells you where you need to look in the code to see if you ever want to see what the actual, function looks like, what the underlying code looks like. So it's helpful in that sense, but it just adds this extra layer of complexity for someone who's getting into it at the first time. And the idea of the API, anyway, like I was saying earlier, is to make these things a little simpler. So you don't need to know how to make the Suzanne, you just need to know how to tell Blender, make a Suzanne, or make a monkey. So EasyBPY that's basically the idea. The idea is like, we don't need a super complex bipy.ops underscore, the this that. We should make things simpler because that's the idea of what the API is supposed to be in the first place. And I think this is a really cool way to go about it, because even though I'm not going to be really going into how to use this library specifically, the way it's been designed is it'll kind of layer in over top of the existing Blender library. So if you're watching my videos and you're kind of like, you know what, this is still a little too much for me, why can't it just be a little simpler? This may be your gateway then in. Because it just takes some of the stuff and just makes it a little bit simpler. It's not this. It's just a handful of functions that do the things that you want them to do, particularly when you get to things like rotation, but we'll get to all that in good time. So yeah, it's just another option for getting started with Blender, and possibly a direction that the API might head in the future, he says, fingers crossed, although that would probably break compatibility with tons of stuff. And I almost forgot, but one of my favorite resources for learning this Python stuff is this Darkfall channel. This guy provides a lot of really great resources, again, filling in those kind of gaps. This is just one of many videos that he's got on scripting in Blender. So yeah, another great resource for someone who's getting started. So anyway, that is the idea. So hopefully you got a little bit of a taste of kind of where we're going and how we're going to try and kind of break it down, make it seem a little less intimidating, and make it a little easier to get started with scripting in Blender.